Hi, I'm Jeff Murrah, and I want to welcome you to True Texas History. Today we're going to be talking about the attack on Fort Parker. Now, I know some of you may say, okay, that's not necessarily one of the most exciting events in Texas history, or look at it as kind of ho-hum. But let me reassure you, there's a lot more to the story than you may have originally thought. See, what happened on this day, May the 19th, back in 1836, changed Texas history, it changed Oklahoma history, and it changed the history of the Indian nations in a major way. See, what happened that day was that a band of Kiowas, Comanches, Caddos, and some other Indians went ahead and attacked Fort Parker out there in Limestone County. Now, the fort itself was essentially the community center for about 8 or 9 families. Most of them were part of the Parker clan. And the way the fort worked, whenever there was a threat, everybody would run into the fort. And this was no small fort. It took up roughly about an acre of land. It had a couple of blockhouses, wooden palisades. It was your typical frontier-looking fort. Instead of, like 4 of those big towers, it just had 2 in opposite corners, diagonal from each other. Now, on this particular day, when the Indians attacked, there were roughly over 100 braves, and there were about half a dozen defenders in the fort. So they were very undermanned in terms of dealing with the threat. Now, part of the reason for this, some of them had interactions with the Indians before, and things went smoothly. They didn't have a whole lot to worry about, so they weren't always real fearful of them. This time, though, the Indians were stirred up. Now, perhaps this was part of the, inciting of the locals done by Cordoba. I'm not sure. I think it's quite possible, since this episode at Fort Parker occurred on the Navasota River, and many of these incidents where they were trying to stir up the Indians were occurring out there in East Texas. Now, this particular location there at Fort Parker was at the outer limits of the Austin colony, because Parker was one of the original 300 that had volunteered to come to Texas, set up with Austin's colony. They'd been there since about 1834, so they were fairly well established and prominent members of their community. Now, this was one of those religiously based communities. They were a bunch of Baptists that had formed up north and transferred their church down south. Now, in attacking the fort, they overpowered the men defending it, and they captured some of the women and children. Now, a couple of them were held hostage for ransom, and the ransoms were paid. They got the kids back within a year or two. Now, in the case of the Parker kids, Cynthia Ann Parker and her brother, they were taken further away to where paying the ransom was not a readily available option. So, in being taken away, Cynthia Ann, which we're going to pick up later in another episode, she was later rescued by the Rangers, but prior to that, her brother had gone ahead and had married a Mexican woman, and then during the war between the states, he fought with a predominantly Mexican command for the Texas and the Confederacy, but he still maintained some connection with the tribe. Now, over the years, people had seen reports of Cynthia Ann Parker, but she finally emerged years later when Saul Ross went ahead and rescued her. And that'll be another episode. It's the fact that her children, Kawana Parker and a few others, became movers and shakers in Texas and Oklahoma and the Indian territories. So the incidents that occurred there at Fort Parker did change the lives of many people. And, if you had this idea, well, there was just a frontier homestead that was attacked by Indians. No, this was a large compound. They were just overwhelmed by the numbers, 100 Indians to 5 defenders. Those are pretty bad odds. So anyways, I wanted to go ahead and go over that, explain a little bit, tie that into what we've been going over with the Cordoba incident, because the Indians were being stirred up. They were a constant threat on the empire, on the frontier. And keep in mind that we're still dealing with May of 1836. The army, they had won the victory at San Jacinto. They had not all gotten back to their homesteads to where they can defend them at this point. So it was a dangerous time in Texas history and an eventful time. But if you have any questions about this episode, feel free to leave them below. I'll be glad to get back to them. And I do keep adding more videos each day to True Texas History on the YouTube channel. I hope you tune in. Better yet, subscribe. But until next time, this is Jeff Murrah wishing you vaya con Dios, my friends. Goodbye.